He knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Eleanor was in the kitchen, cutting bread, when she heard it. 3 knocks. Slow and uncertain, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they had the right house, or wasn't sure they were ready for whoever would open the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked down the hall. She opened the door, and the bread knife fell from her hand. James Hartley was standing on her doorstep. Thinner than she remembered. Older. His dark hair was longer, touched with gray at the sides that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a coat that was too big for him now, like he had lost weight and never replaced the things that no longer fit. His eyes were the same. Dark and deep, and looking at her like she was the only real thing he had seen in a very long time. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the street behind him, pulling at the dead leaves on the pavement. Somewhere down the road, a child was calling for someone. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a small English town. Eleanor stood at the door and could not move. "James," she said finally. Her voice came out strange, too quiet, like she was afraid that if she spoke too loud, he would disappear. He didn't disappear. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was lower than she remembered, rougher, like something worn down by time and weather and things he wasn't going to say in the first 5 seconds. "I know I should have written first. I know this is..." He stopped, started again. "I didn't know how to write it." She stepped back from the door without meaning to. Not to let him in, just because her legs needed to move. "Everyone said you were dead," she said. "I know," he said. "I waited 2 years, James." "I know," he said again. And something in his face changed. Not quite pain, but close to it. The kind of look a person has when they know they deserve what's coming and they're not going to argue. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. At the coat that was too big, at the gray at his temples, at the hands she had held 100 times, now older and marked by things she couldn't see. Then she stepped aside and let him in. She didn't know why. She would think about that later. Why she stepped aside instead of closing the door, why her body made that decision before her mind could stop it. Maybe because 2 years of grief doesn't disappear in 5 seconds. Maybe because part of her had never fully believed he was gone. Maybe because James Hartley had always walked into rooms like he belonged in them, and some part of her still believed that too. He came inside. She closed the door. They stood in the narrow hallway. 2 people who had once known everything about each other and now didn't know where to begin. "I'll make tea," Eleanor said, because it was England and because it was the only thing she could think of to say. She went to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. On the kitchen table, still open to the page she had been reading that morning, was a catalogue from Henderson's, the wedding shop on the high street. She had circled 3 flower arrangements in pencil, white roses and pale green leaves. Simple, she had thought. Elegant. Arthur would like it. She closed the catalogue and put it in the drawer. Then she put the kettle on and tried to remember how to breathe. James had been 22 years old when the war started. Eleanor remembered the day he left. August 1914. The whole town had come out to watch the men go, standing on the pavement in the early morning light, some waving, some crying, some just watching in silence because they didn't know what else to do. James had been in his uniform, which was still too new and too clean, and he had held Eleanor's hands at the gate of her house for a long time without saying anything. "I'll write," he had said finally. Every day, she had answered. And he had. For the first year, letters came regularly. Careful letters because the army read everything. But she could read between the lines. She learned to understand what he couldn't say directly. When he wrote that the weather was difficult, she knew it meant something worse than weather. When he wrote that he missed her cooking, she knew it meant he was hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. Then the letters stopped. In March of 1917, a letter arrived from the army. Not from James, from his officer. The words were formal and cold, the kind of words written by someone who had written too many of them. Private James Hartley, missing in action. Presumed dead following a battle near the village of Passchendaele. Presumed. Eleanor had held on to that word for months. Presumed meant not certain. Presumed meant possibly. Presumed meant there was still a door that hadn't been fully closed. But then 6 months passed. Then a year. Then the war ended, and the men came home, thin and quiet and changed, and James was not among them. She asked everyone she could find who had served near Passchendaele. Nobody had seen him after that day in March. She stopped holding on to presumed. She let herself grieve. It took a long time. Grief is not a straight line. She had learned that. It comes in waves, unexpected and uneven. She would be fine for weeks, and then she would hear a piece of music he had loved, or smell pipe tobacco on the street, and the whole thing would come back at once like a door blown open by wind. But she had gotten through it. She had kept working at the clinic. She had kept living. And 14 months ago, at a dinner at a friend's house, she had met Arthur Pemberton. Arthur was steady. Arthur was present. Arthur called when he said he would call, and arrived when he said he would arrive, and never made her wonder where she stood with him. After years of wondering, of waiting, of holding on to a word like presumed, steadiness felt like something close to peace. She had said yes when he asked her to marry him. She had meant it. She still meant it. She told herself that now, standing at the kitchen stove, watching the kettle and listening to James move quietly in the hallway, the sound of his coat being hung on the hook by the door, the familiar sound she had not heard in 5 years, and somehow still recognized. She still meant it. James appeared in the kitchen doorway. He took in the small room, the blue curtains she had made herself, the photographs on the shelf, the 2 cups she had already set out on the table without thinking. 2 cups, old habit. He sat down in the chair across from hers, the chair where he had always sat. She brought the tea and sat down. Neither of them reached for their cups. "Where were you?" she asked. Her voice was steady now. She had found it again somewhere between the kettle and the table. "Where have you been for 2 years, James?" He wrapped both hands around the cup. "In France," he said, "a village called Saint-Colombe. He paused, looking for the right word. "I was not well. For a long time. A family there took me in, an old woman and her daughter. I didn't speak for the first 3 months." "You didn't speak?" He looked at the table. "There was a time when the words stopped coming," he said simply. "The doctor in the village said it happens sometimes, after certain things." He paused again. "I'm not going to describe the certain things." Eleanor looked at him. At the way he held the cup, carefully, like he was aware of his own hands, at the gray at his temples, at the small scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. "When did you come back to England?" she asked. 3 weeks ago, he said. "I went to London first. I needed to arrange some things. Tell the army I was alive." He almost smiled at that. They were not happy with me. "And then you came here. And then I came here," he said. He met her eyes. "I heard about Arthur from someone in town. Before I knocked on your door, I mean." I already knew. Eleanor held his gaze. "And you came anyway?" "I came anyway," he said quietly. "I needed to see you. I needed to—" He stopped. I don't know exactly what I needed. I just knew I couldn't be in England and not come. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the October light was starting to fade, turning the garden gold and brown. Eleanor picked up her cup and drank. The tea was too hot, but she drank it anyway because she needed something to do with her hands. "How long are you staying?" she asked. He held her gaze carefully. "I don't know yet," he said. "That depends on things I don't have the answer to." She understood what he meant. She wished she didn't. She stood up and took her cup to the basin. When she turned back around, James was watching her with that look she remembered, the one that meant he was thinking something he wasn't ready to say yet. "You should go to a hotel," she said. "There's one on the high street. The Crown. It's clean and not too expensive." He gave a slow nod. He stood up. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had just forgotten over 5 years what it felt like to be in a room with him. "Eleanor," he said at the door. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For not writing when I could have. For coming back when maybe I shouldn't have. For everything." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Come back tomorrow. We'll talk properly." He left. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after she heard the front door close. Then she opened the drawer, took out the Hendersons' catalog, and sat down at the table. She looked at the white roses and pale green leaves she had circled in pencil. She didn't uncircle them. But she closed the catalog without looking at them for very long. He came back the next morning. Eleanor had not slept well. She had lain in bed for a long time, listening to the wind outside and thinking about things she didn't want to think about. At some point she had fallen asleep, and when she woke up the room was gray with early light, and she felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hours she had slept. She was already dressed when he knocked. 8 o'clock exactly. James had always been punctual. She opened the door, and he was standing there with 2 paper bags from the bakery on Church Street. "I brought bread," he said, "and something that might be a pastry." The woman behind the counter called it something I didn't recognize. Eleanor almost smiled. She stepped back and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table again. He had brought good bread, the thick kind with a hard crust that she liked. And the pastry turned out to be an apple thing with too much sugar that was excellent. She made tea. They ate without talking much, which was strange because James had always been a man who talked easily in the mornings. He used to read pieces of the newspaper out loud while she made breakfast, asking her opinion on things, filling the kitchen with words. Now he was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, just careful. Like a man who had learned to measure what he said before he said it. "How is the clinic?" he asked after a while. "Busy," she said. "There are still men coming in from the war. Not injuries anymore, mostly. Other things." She paused. "Things that don't show on the outside." He gave a slow nod. He understood that kind of thing. "And your mother?" he asked. "She moved to Bath 2 years ago," Eleanor said, "to be near my aunt. She's well?" He was quiet again. He was looking at the table, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "James," she said. He looked up. "We have to talk about this properly," she said. "Not around it." She held his gaze. You know what I mean? He set the cup down. Yes, he said. I know. She folded her hands on the table. Arthur is a good man, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not. This isn't a situation where I'm unhappy and looking for a reason to leave. She paused. I was happy. I am happy. James listened without interrupting. That was something she had always respected about him. He listened completely, without preparing his answer while you were still talking. Then why did you let me in yesterday? He asked quietly. When I knocked, you could have closed the door. You could have told me to write a letter. You could have called Arthur. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Because I needed to see that you were real, she said finally. 2 years of thinking someone is dead. When they appear at your door, you need to see that they're real before you can do anything else. He accepted that. He didn't push further. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, someone was walking past the window. She could hear footsteps on the pavement, the sound of a bicycle bell further up the street. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said. He waited. Are you all right? She looked at him carefully. Not are you feeling well. I mean, are you all right? Really? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Some days are better than others. The nights are still hard sometimes. He paused. In France, when I wasn't speaking, the woman who took me in, her name was Madame Colette. She used to sit with me in the evenings and read out loud. She didn't expect me to respond. She just read. And that helped somehow. Having someone there without the pressure of conversation. Eleanor looked at him. She thought about him sitting in a small French kitchen, silent, while an old woman read to him. She thought about what he must have seen to make the words stop coming. She didn't ask. He had said he wasn't going to describe the certain things, and she respected that. When did you start speaking again? She asked instead. About 4 months after I arrived, he said. The first word I said was the French word for bread. He almost smiled. Madame Colette cried. I think she was more relieved than I was. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned to say. I'm glad you're alive, James, she said quietly. Whatever else is true, I'm glad you're alive. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something deeper than a smile. Thank you, he said. His voice was very low. The morning light was coming through the blue curtains now, filling the kitchen with pale gold. Eleanor stood up and cleared the cups and the paper bags. She moved around the kitchen the way she always did, without wasted movement. And she was aware of James watching her the way he used to, with that quiet attention that had always made her feel both seen and safe. She stopped at the sink and looked out the window at the garden. Arthur is coming for dinner on Friday, she said. Her voice was steady. I think you should know that. James was quiet behind her. He's going to find out you're here, she continued, if he hasn't already. This is a small town. I know, James said. She turned around. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between pain and strength. What do you want, James? She asked. Not what you think is right, not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? He held her gaze for a long time. You, he said simply. That's the honest answer. I know it's not fair. I know I don't have the right to say it. But you asked for the honest answer and that's it. Eleanor stood very still. The kitchen was quiet around them. just the small sounds of the house. The clock on the shelf, the wind at the window, the distant sound of the town waking up outside. She turned back to the sink. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Same time." She heard him stand up. She heard him put on his coat in the hallway. She heard the front door open and close. She stood at the sink for a long time, looking at the garden. The roses along the back wall were dying for the season, brown at the edges, losing their petals one by one in the October wind. She had planted those roses the year James left for the war. She hadn't thought about that in a long time. Arthur came to the clinic on Thursday. Eleanor was between patients when she saw him through the glass door of her small office, tall, well-dressed, hat in hand, speaking to the receptionist with the easy confidence of a man who was comfortable in most rooms. He was good-looking in a clean, honest way. Dark blonde hair, good jaw, kind eyes. The kind of man that mothers pointed out to their daughters. She went out to meet him. He kissed her cheek and smiled. "You look tired," he said, but gently. Not as a criticism, as a concern. "I didn't sleep well," she said. "Come in." They sat in her small office. He had brought flowers, yellow ones, her favorite, which he placed on the corner of her desk without making a show of it. That was Arthur. Thoughtful without being dramatic. "I heard something today," he said. His voice was careful. Even. Not angry. Arthur rarely got angry quickly, which was one of the things she respected about him. He looked at her directly. "I heard that James Hartley is in town, that he's alive." Eleanor held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "He came to my door on Tuesday." A short silence. Arthur looked at the flowers on the desk, then back at her. "You didn't tell me," he said. "I needed a day to understand it myself first," she said honestly. "I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. "Is he all right?" The question surprised her. She had expected something else first, hurt or jealousy, or at least more silence. But that was Arthur too. His first question was always about the other person. "He's changed," she said. "He was hurt. He spent a long time in France getting better. He's improving now, but he's still finding his way back." Arthur gave a slow nod. He turned his hat in his hands, a small, careful movement that Eleanor knew well. It was the thing he did when he was working through something difficult. "I'm glad he's alive," Arthur said finally. "Whatever else is true. He was important to you. I'm glad he's alive." Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. "You're a good man, Arthur," she said quietly. He looked at her then. Really looked at her, with those steady, kind eyes that never missed much. "Has he said anything?" Arthur asked. "To you? About what he wants?" She was quiet for a moment. She owed him honesty. He deserved that more than anyone. "He said he came back because he needed to see me," she said carefully. "That's all I know for certain." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the window, at the gray October sky outside. "And you?" he asked. His voice was very even. "What do you need, Eleanor?" She looked at him, at the flowers he had brought without making a show of it, at the hat turning slowly in his hands, at the man who called when he said he would call, and arrived when he said he would arrive. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear." He stood up slowly and put his hat back on. "I'm not going to pretend this is easy," he said. "It isn't." He looked at her. "But I'm also not going to make demands, because that's not who I am, and it wouldn't change anything anyway." He paused. "Take the time you need." "But Eleanor." He stopped at the door and turned back. "Don't take too long. Not because of me. Because of you. You deserve to know what you want." He left. Eleanor sat in her office for a long time after he went. Then her next patient arrived, and she stood up and went back to work, because that was what you did. You kept moving, even when everything felt uncertain and heavy and too complicated for a Thursday afternoon. That evening, she walked. She often walked in the evenings when she needed to think. The town was quiet at that hour, the shops closed, the streets mostly empty, just the sound of her boots on the pavement and the wind in the old trees along the high street. She walked without a destination, which meant she wasn't surprised when she found herself on the street where the Crown Hotel was. She stopped outside. The lights were on in the upper rooms. She didn't know which room was his. She stood on the pavement, looking up at the warm yellow windows for a moment, feeling slightly foolish. Then the front door opened, and James came out. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped too. They faced each other on the empty street. "I was walking," she said, which was obvious but true. "So was I," he said. He looked at her carefully. "Are you all right?" "Arthur came to the clinic today," she said. "James was still. How was he?" She thought about it. "Honest," she said. "Fair. Better than I deserved, probably." James looked at the street. "Don't say that," he said quietly. "None of this is your fault." "It's not about fault," she said. "It's just—" She stopped. She didn't know how to finish that sentence. There were too many ways to finish it, and none of them were simple. They stood on the pavement in the cold October evening. The street was empty around them. A light came on in a house across the road. Somewhere nearby, a church clock began to strike 8. "Walk with me," James said. "Just for a bit, if you want." She looked at him for a moment. Then she fell into step beside him. They walked along the high street without talking, past the bakery where he had bought the bread that morning, past the church where the clock was still settling after striking 8, past the small park where they had sat together years ago on summer evenings, reading, not needing to say much because being there together had been enough. Neither of them mentioned the park as they passed it, but both of them slowed down slightly. At the corner of her street, they stopped. "Thank you for walking with me," James said. She looked at him in the dim light of the street lamp. He looked back at her. And for a moment, just a moment, the 5 years disappeared. He was just James. She was just Eleanor. And they were standing on a corner in the town where they had grown up, and everything was still possible. Then the moment passed. "Good night, James," she said. "Good night, Eleanor." She walked home. She didn't look back, but she listened to his footsteps going in the other direction until she couldn't hear them anymore. On Friday evening, Arthur came for dinner. Eleanor had cooked carefully: roast chicken, roasted vegetables, an apple cake that had taken most of the afternoon. She had set the table with the good plates and the white cloth, and she had put the yellow flowers Arthur had brought to the clinic in a vase in the center. Arthur arrived at 7. He brought wine. He kissed her cheek. He said kind things about the table and the smell from the kitchen, and he meant all of it, Eleanor could tell. Arthur never said things he didn't mean. They ate. They talked about ordinary things: his work, a case he had been working on, a friend who had just had a baby. Eleanor listened and responded and poured more wine, and the evening was warm and completely normal. and completely exhausting. Not because of Arthur, because of herself, because of the effort it took to be fully present in that warm kitchen with that good man when another part of her mind was somewhere else entirely. After dinner, they sat by the fire in the small sitting room. Arthur had his wine. Eleanor had her tea. The fire made the room feel golden and close. "Tell me what you're thinking," Arthur said. Not asking, just opening a door. Eleanor looked at the fire for a moment. "I don't know how to do this without hurting someone," she said. Arthur was quiet. "Whatever I decide," she continued, "someone gets hurt. That's the truth of it. And I've been sitting with that all week, and I still don't know how to make it not true." Arthur turned his glass slowly in his hands. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Of course," she said. He looked at the fire. "I knew," he said quietly. "When I asked you to marry me, I knew that James was still there. Not James himself, because everyone thought he was dead, but the space he had left." He paused. "You never talked about him. But people who have lost someone they loved don't talk about them in a particular way. A careful way. Like the subject has edges." Eleanor looked at him. "I thought it would be all right," Arthur continued. "I thought that with time..." He stopped. "I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because I want to be honest with you, the way you've been honest with me." He looked at her. "I knew, Eleanor. And I said yes anyway, because I love you, and I thought love would be enough." Eleanor felt her eyes fill. She blinked it back. "Is it?" she asked quietly. "Enough?" Arthur was quiet for a long time. He looked at the fire. Then he looked at her. "I think," he said carefully, "that love is always enough when it's the only thing in the room." He paused. "But when it's competing with something else, something older and deeper and not finished, I honestly don't know." They sat in silence for a while. The fire settled, sending up a small shower of sparks. Then Arthur stood up. He put his glass down and picked up his coat. "I'm going to go," he said. "Not because I'm angry, because I think you need to think, and you can't think properly when I'm sitting here." Eleanor stood up too. At the door, he stopped and looked at her. "I'm still here," he said simply. "That hasn't changed." "But Eleanor..." He paused. "Talk to him. Whatever is unfinished between you, finish it, one way or the other." He held her gaze. "You can't make a real decision until you do." He left. Eleanor stood in the hallway for a long time after the sound of his car faded down the street. Then she put on her coat and walked to the Crown Hotel. She knocked on his door at 9:30. James opened it in his shirt sleeves, a book in his hand. He looked at her face and put the book down immediately. "Come in," he said. The room was small and plain. A single bed, a writing desk, a window that looked out over the dark street below. On the desk were several sheets of paper covered in his handwriting. He had been writing. She didn't ask what. She sat in the chair by the window. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Arthur came for dinner," she said. "I know," he said. "I saw his car on the street." He was quiet for a moment. "How did it go?" She looked at her hands. "He told me he knew," she said. "Before he asked me to marry him, he knew there was still something unfinished. He asked me anyway." She looked up. "He told me to come and talk to you, to finish what isn't finished. So that's why I'm here." James looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want to know?" "Everything you haven't told me yet," she said. She held his gaze. "What happened, James?" "Not the war. I don't need the details. I mean what happened to you, inside. Because the man in front of me is not the same man who left in 1914, and I need to understand who you are now before I can understand anything else." James was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. Then he met her eyes, and he told her. Not everything. Some things had no words yet, and he said so, and she accepted that. But he told her about the day in March 1917, about the noise and the mud and the moment when something inside him simply stopped, about waking up in the village of Sainte-Colombe 3 weeks later with no memory of how he got there, about the long months of silence, sitting by Madame Colette's fire while she read aloud, and he slowly came back to himself. About the first morning he woke up and felt something other than nothing. About deciding to come home. About being afraid the whole journey back, that he had waited too long, that the world had moved on without him, which it had every right to do, that Eleanor had moved on, which she had every right to do, that he had come anyway because not coming was something he couldn't live with. Eleanor listened to all of it without speaking. The room was very quiet. The street outside was empty and dark, just the sound of the wind and, somewhere far away, a train. When he finished, they sat in silence for a while. Then Eleanor said, "I grieved you, James. I want you to know that. I really grieved you. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, and there were months when I didn't know how to get through a day." She paused. "And then I did. And then I met Arthur, and I built something real and steady and good." She looked at him. "And now you're here." "I know," he said quietly. "I know what I'm asking you to consider. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm not asking you to decide at all. That's not my right." He looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much and somehow still held something warm. "I just needed you to know that what we had, what I felt, it didn't go away. Not in the war, not in France, not in the year it took me to come home." He paused. "It's still here, and I thought you deserved to know that." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. The fire in the small grate had burned low. The room was cooler now, just the lamp on the writing desk throwing a small circle of gold light. She stood up. She crossed the room, and she did something she hadn't planned to do. She crossed the room, and she put her hand against his face, just for a moment, just her palm against his cheek. And he closed his eyes and covered her hand with his. And they stayed like that in the quiet room for a long moment that neither of them would forget. Then she stepped back. "I need to think," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know," he said. He opened his eyes. "Take all the time you need." She picked up her coat. At the door, she stopped. She didn't turn around. "Don't leave town yet," she said. She heard him breathe out slowly. "I won't," he said. She left. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and let herself think, really think, without pushing anything away. She had spent the whole week being careful. Now it was past midnight, and the house was completely quiet, and there was nobody to be careful for. So she thought. She thought about James at 22, holding her hands at the gate and saying, "I'll write." She thought about the letters. She thought about March 1917 and the word presumed and the long months of holding on to it. She thought about the grief, the real grief, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move for months. She had carried that stone for a long time, She thought about the evening she met Arthur. How easy it had been to talk to him. How he had made her laugh at that dinner table, something she hadn't done easily in a long time. How he had called the next day, just to say he had enjoyed meeting her. No pressure, no show. She thought about Arthur's face by the fire. I knew, and I said yes anyway, because I love you, and I thought love would be enough. She thought about James's face in the hotel room, the way he had closed his eyes when she put her hand against his cheek, the way he had said it's still here with the quiet certainty of someone who had had a long time to be sure. She thought until the room began to lighten with the first gray of morning. And then she knew. She got up, she dressed, she made tea she didn't drink. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the garden where the roses were almost gone for the season, just a few brown petals holding on in the October wind. At 8 o'clock, she put on her coat and walked to the Crown Hotel. James was already awake. He opened the door and looked at her face and said nothing. He stepped back and she came in. She sat in the chair by the window. He sat on the edge of the bed. "I've decided," she said. He waited. She looked at him, at the gray at his temples, at the scar above his eyebrow, at the hands that had learned to be careful with themselves, at the man who had come back from something terrible and crossed a long road of uncertainty to knock on her door. "I love you," she said quietly. "I want to say that first because it's true, and I've been afraid to say it all week. I love you. I don't think I ever stopped." She paused. "But James..." He watched her. He didn't rush her. She looked at her hands. "I'm going to marry Arthur," she said. The room was very quiet. James looked at her for a long moment. His face didn't fall apart. He was too controlled for that, or had already thought about this possibility enough times that he had built something around it. But something in his eyes changed. Something went quiet in there that had been, for a moment, less quiet. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was very even. "Let me finish," she said gently. "Please." He was quiet. She looked at the window, at the gray October sky beginning to lighten. "What you came back to, what you're asking me to return to, it's real," she said. "I know it's real. What we had was real, and what you feel is real, and what I feel is real." She paused. "But James, we are not 22 anymore. We are people who have been through things, both of us. And I have built a life, a real life, with real things in it, with a real man who loves me and has never once made me feel uncertain about where I stand." She looked at him. "I spent 2 years not knowing where I stood. With the army, with the word presumed, with the silence. I can't go back to that. Even beautiful uncertainty, even the kind that comes with you." James was very still. She made herself keep going. "If you had come back a year ago," she said, "before Arthur, it would have been different. I would have opened that door, and it would have been different. But you didn't. And I'm not saying that as blame. I know why you didn't, and I understand, and I don't blame you for any of it." She met his eyes. "But I can't undo the year that happened. I can't undo what I built, and I don't think I should." The room was quiet for a long time. James looked at his hands. Then he looked at her. "Is he good to you?" he asked. His voice was low. The question of a man who was trying very hard to ask the right things instead of the ones he actually wanted to ask. "Yes," she said. "He's very good to me." James was still. Then he gave one slow nod, the nod of someone accepting something they had known might be coming and had not quite believed until now. "Then that's enough," he said quietly. "If he's good to you, that's enough." Eleanor felt her eyes fill. She blinked it back hard. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "I'm sorry, James. For all of it. For the war, for the time, for the fact that we ended up here instead of somewhere else." "Don't be sorry," he said. He looked at her with those dark eyes that were tired and sad and still, underneath everything, warm. Coming back was the right thing. Seeing you was the right thing. Even this is the right thing. Knowing. Being certain. He paused. "I spent a year not being certain about anything. This hurts, but it's real. Real is better than uncertain." Eleanor stood up. Her legs felt unsteady, but she stood up. James stood up too. They were very close in the small room. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him and held him. Properly. Fully. The way you hold someone when you are saying something that words aren't enough for. He held her back. His arms were around her, and she could feel his breath and the warmth of him, and all 5 years of distance falling away in that moment. They stayed like that for a long time. Then she stepped back. She picked up her coat. "Be happy, James," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Wherever you go, whatever you do next, be happy." He looked at her. For a moment his face was completely open, no control, no careful management, just the real thing underneath all of it. "You too, Eleanor," he said. His voice was rough. "Be very happy." She walked to the door. She opened it. She didn't look back. But at the bottom of the hotel stairs, she stopped. She stood at the empty lobby and pressed one hand flat against the wall and breathed for a moment. Then she straightened up. She walked out into the October morning. She called Arthur that morning. Not from the hotel. She walked home first, took off her coat, sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes, doing nothing. Then she picked up the telephone and called him at his office. He answered on the second ring. "I'd like to see you," she said. "Today, if you can." He came at noon. She made lunch, soup, bread, nothing complicated, and they sat at the kitchen table and she told him. Not everything. Some things were hers to keep. But she told him that she had gone to see James, that she had said what needed to be said, that she had made her decision, and the decision was him. Arthur listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you sure?" She looked at him, at the steady, kind eyes that had never once looked at her with anything other than honesty. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. The soup got cold, and neither of them noticed, and outside the window the October sun came out for the first time in days, thin and pale but real, falling through the blue curtains onto the kitchen floor. James left town on Monday. Eleanor knew because she saw him from the window of the clinic, his coat, his bag, walking toward the station in the pale morning light. She stood at the window and watched until he turned the corner, and was gone. She stood there for a moment after. Then her next patient arrived, and she went back to work. The wedding was on a Saturday in December. Small, just family and close friends, the church on the high street, white flowers and candlelight. Eleanor wore her mother's pearls and a dress she had made herself, simple and well-cut, cream-colored. Arthur cried a little when she walked in, which she hadn't expected, and which made her cry too. The vicar, a small, serious man named Mr. Ellis, spoke about commitment and choosing and the difference between falling into something and deciding to stay. Eleanor listened to every word. When Arthur put the ring on her finger, his hands were shaking slightly. Hers were steady. She had made her choice. She had made it clearly and honestly and with her eyes open. That steadiness was what clear choices felt like, she thought. Not the absence of feeling, not the absence of grief, just certainty, solid ground under her feet. After the ceremony, they walked out into the December cold together, and someone threw flower petals, and Arthur laughed and pulled her close and kissed her right there on the church steps in front of everyone. She laughed too. It was real. All of it was real. 6 months later, a letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor noticed that and almost smiled. Tuesdays, she thought. Always Tuesdays. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. She opened it at the kitchen table, alone, before Arthur came down for breakfast. It was short. Eleanor, I hope this finds you well and happy. I am in Edinburgh now. I have a position at a school here, teaching literature to boys who mostly don't want to learn it, which suits me better than I expected. The city is cold and gray, and I find I don't mind. I have started writing again. Properly, I mean. Not letters. Something longer. I don't know yet what it will become. I want you to know that I am all right. Better than all right some days. I wanted you to have that. I won't write again. Not because of any bad feeling. There is none, from my side. But because some things are better finished cleanly. This is me finishing cleanly. Be very happy, Eleanor. You deserve it more than most. Eleanor read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and held it for a moment. She thought about a Tuesday in October and a door opening, and a man standing on her doorstep with a coat that was too big for him and eyes that had seen too much. She thought about everything that had happened in the weeks after. The bread from the bakery, the walk along the high street, the hotel room and the lamp and the hand against his cheek, and the long, honest words that had finally said what needed to be said. She thought about Arthur crying when she walked into the church. She folded the letter one more time and put it in the drawer of the writing desk, not thrown away, not shown to anyone, just kept. The way you keep something that was real and mattered and is now finished. She heard Arthur's footsteps on the stairs. She put the kettle on. When he came into the kitchen, she was standing at the stove, and the morning light was coming through the blue curtains, and the room smelled of tea and bread and the ordinary, perfect details of a life she had chosen. "Good morning," Arthur said. He kissed her cheek. "Good morning," she said. He sat at the table. She brought the tea. They sat across from each other in the morning light, comfortable and quiet. The way two people are when they have found their rhythm together and no longer need to think about it. Outside, the April morning was bright and new. Birds were calling in the garden. The roses along the back wall were beginning to bud, small and tight and green, not open yet, but coming. Eleanor looked at them through the window. Then she looked at Arthur, reading the newspaper at her kitchen table, in the chair that was his now. That had always, she thought, been going to be his. She picked up her cup. She drank her tea. And the morning came in through the blue curtains, warm and slow and full of ordinary light. And Eleanor Pemberton, who had once stood at a door and not known what was going to happen next, sat in her kitchen and felt, completely and without doubt, at home.